right classroom? Come on in, take a seat beside me, my friend. Look, here comes T.A. Charlie.
Morning, you're watching The Road to Concord with Professor Joe Bakanovic. Homeroom is on Rumble. You just go to Rumble and you search the channels for The Road to Concord. It's one word. When you find it, you go ahead and you click follow. It might mean you got to set up an account, but it's fast, it's easy, and it's free. Sorry about that.
Natasha did it.
Uh, let's see, I did it, you can do it. For those technologically challenged members of the class, you can also catch us on Facebook, Twitch, Twitter, and sometimes on YouTube.
And if you catch him, you can
we're
make him
actually
fight.
on YouTube today. But normally it's just Wednesday, but we're talking just logic today, so hopefully we won't get censored unless Joe talks about something that he shouldn't. Then you can catch podcast after the show. It's uploaded to Podbean, iHeartRadio, and Spotify. Just look for The Road to Concord. You can go to the blog page. That's theroadtoconcord.com. That's where you find all your show notes, study notes, and handouts for the class. Finally, you can email the professor at joe@theroadtoconcord.com. He's a little slow right now, but he'll eventually get around to emailing you back. Phones are on today, 229-469-0335 for registered numbers. If you wish to call in and are not a Dodo Cop, just send us an email with your name and number, and we'll let you on the show. If you find our classes helpful, please click the thumbs up, like, and subscribe, and share it with those you think could benefit from it. Just warn them Joe is an acquired taste, and we don't say that lightly. This show is listener sponsored, meaning we do not solicit business advertising, so we're not limited in the content we provide for y'all. With that said, we do ask for your participation on a value for value basis. If you find our shows of value to you, then you can provide us an equivalent portion of your labor and treasure through the donate link on the Road to Concord blog page, the show description on Rumble, and the comments on the other streams. And it's Gummy Bear's fault that I'm coughing because I got her cold.
Well, hold on, man. He said, go Army, beat Navy.
Yeah,
No!
we know T.A. Charlie isn't all there. Now just stay seated and give the class a chance. You'll soon realize we not might be the smartest, but we independently form opinions based on reason and logic. We're free thinkers. Let's see what the Road to Concord with Professor Joe Bakanovic has on the lesson plan for today.
Well, on the lesson plan for today, first things first, John Quest, you shush that blasphemy on my board. I do not like our support the Navy. I am a Marine, but the only time we support the Navy is when the Army-Navy game. And then we have to support the Navy because the majority of that football team are Marines. Ha. Okay, look, we have a little, I don't know how we're going to want to discuss this today, but we got something going on with Charlie. And I need to get it real quick because it seems like I didn't get it to work right here. Oh, yeah. Right here. Let me do this. There you go. That's Charlie, apparently. I did not know this. Natasha explained it to us. But Charlie says he's an EV now. You know, I thought he meant electric vehicle, but apparently he's a Pokemon. Is that right, Natasha? Yeah, they're lurking around. Did we do that right?
Yes.
So go ahead.
By my professional opinion, we were discussing whether he would, die in a burning explosion or end up being electrocuted. If he ends up with being burned, he would possibly evolve into a Flareon, which is fire type. If he's electrocuted, he would evolve into an electric type, and they each have their own evolutions specifically. The fire one is called Flareon. Electric is Jolteon. And I really hope that no one's against Pokemon, otherwise I apologize deeply.
So Natasha is, as soon as Charlie gets his new truck, which is a hybrid, which is an EV, whether he likes it or not, he becomes a Pokemon. This is the Pokemon he becomes. This is an EV. And then Natasha's going to catch him and make him fight, and she's going to choose him for the battles. And when he loses, if he dies via electricity or being burned up, then, then Natasha gave us the evolution and all this other good stuff. So,
oh, no. If it's in battle, he just faints, and then I can just choose to go heal him up. Yeah. But I could take his kidney first. I mean, if I'm feeling like it.
All right, Natasha. See, this thing's getting complicated here. This is what happens when you become a Pokemon, man. That's just, geez, a wheeze. We're going to have to do something with all of this crap. Anyhow.
No, but Charlie, I choose you.
All right, off you go. They were messing with me before this show again. Logic today. And I'm trying to get all serious, going to be a professor today. And they're messing with me, trying to get me to screw up the show again. So I screwed back with them, or at least a little bit. Logic day, right? Well, it's supposed to be on Fridays, Fallacy Fridays, but we're doing something on Fridays. So we're going to be teaching logic on Tuesday today. So it's time we get ourselves into that classroom. Here we go. Logic class time. Wait a minute. I want that view right there. Sorry about that. All right, Logic 101, part 3. Propositional logic today, right? Okay. Same note from before. This and our previous lessons in this case are meant to be a familiarization classes, folks. I'm not teaching you logic. I'm giving you an overview of what it is and how it works. An informal overview of the subject at that. These classes are meant to teach, not the full rigors, like I said, and they build on each other. So you gotta stick with us here. We're going to do this. Certain selective vocabulary words we're going to keep reviewing over and over again, but we'll burn through them faster and faster each class. Repetition will help you learn. This is important. These are the building blocks of logic and what we're doing. An argument. An argument is composed of a set of declarative statements known as premises, or today, statements or propositions. All the same thing as far as we're concerned here today. One of these appears, one of these statements will be implied or supported by others, et cetera, et cetera. These premises are used to support the final declarative statement known as a conclusion. Now, a premise or premises, it's a proposition. And it's, like I said, same thing. Premises like their thesis in scientific paper. This is what I believe, or this is a statement of fact or an observation, et cetera, et cetera. Statement is an argument meant to imply or support the conclusion. Premises are used to construct arguments, which are in turn used to support a final declarative statement known as a conclusion. This is all just fancy language for premises, the individual, like all men are mortal. That's a premise. Socrates is a man. That's a premise. Socrates is mortal. That's a premise. It's also the concluding premise. Inference. Inference is a logical consequence of a premise. If A and B are true, therefore C must also be true. In this case, I used if all fish have gills and John is a fish. The inference, logical consequence, is that John has gills. In this case, that is also our conclusion. See, conclusion is a declarative statement. This statement is an argument that appears to be, implied or supported by the others. That's the result of all your premises put together. Like I said, we're going to rip through this a little quick. But if you've been in class the last 2 weeks, this should be starting to become familiar. Sound, valid, and rational. These are terms that refer to the internal construction of an argument. In constructing an argument, especially deductive arguments, the goal is to construct that argument so that it is sound, valid, and rational. If a deductive argument is sound, valid, and rational, it is difficult to, quote unquote, break it. Therefore, it's usually a highly reliable argument. To be sound, and this is primarily in deductive reasoning, in order to be sound, an argument has to be both valid. It's the conclusion follows from the premises. That's what valid means, and the premises are true. So if all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, that's sound because the conclusion is valid. Socrates is mortal. And because both of the premises are true. All men are mortal, and Socrates was a man. Valid. Again, primarily in deductive reasoning. An argument is said to be valid if it takes a form where it is impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion to be false. Note, an argument does not have to have true premises to be valid. It has to have a conclusion that must be true if the premises were true. Oh, I did this twice for you now. It's valid and everything. If I go, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Socrates is mortal. That's valid. And it has to be because the conclusion has to be Socrates must be mortal. If the two premises are true, all men are mortal. Socrates is a man, then it has to be true. The conclusion has to be true. The same thing here applied to, all fish have gills. John is a fish. John has gills rather, so John is a fish. That works, but it's John's a person with gills. That doesn't necessarily make him a fish. Well, it's valid in the argument because everything's true, but you're going to have a problem with it because it's an irrational conclusion. That's what this is about. It's got to be rational. The conclusion has to exist in the real world. Inductive reasoning. We're not going to go through too many of these. I've got you guys through this before, but this is a process of formal logic that deals with reasoning from examples or experience to draw a probable conclusion. Inductive conclusions are either weak or strong. You can't say they're absolute proofs. This is the scientific method here, folks. Deductive reasoning. That's a formal logic that deals with the reasoning from premises to conclusions, and conclusions that are either valid or invalid, true or false. We're going to be dealing with that later today. There's your example again. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man. Therefore, Socrates must be mortal. This is our little diagram that by now we've seen before. If you got an argument, if it's deductive, it's either valid or invalid. If it's valid, it's sound or unsound. If it's invalid, it's unsound. And I know. And I over the course of the weeks, you're going to start just learning this by seeing me use it. And then if you have an inductive argument, it's either strong or weak. If it's strong, it's cogent, meaning it makes sense, or it's uncogent, doesn't make sense. If it's a weak inductive argument, then it's just uncogent to begin with. It just doesn't make sense. Here are the terms I really want us to learn today, because we haven't been over this as much. By definition, it's a logical phrase that means something must be true because the definition defines it as being true. And we're going to get into some examples later today where I'm going to probably just get a little cranky with people who do logic. Not y'all, not in the audience, but people who study logic. There are different forms of logic where this irks me. You'll see when we get there. Trust me. I was talking to Charlie before the show. He'll back me up on this. There's certain things that just make me cranky when we get there. So when I say by definition, it is impossible for an object to both exist and not exist in the same space and time. How are you going to argue with that? We'll say, well, you existed in this space and time, but you didn't exist. That you have to change something about the situation to make me exist and not exist in the same space and time. In which case, once you change it to make that true, we're not in the same space and time anymore. So then it isn't true anymore. It's like saying that the microphone here in front of me is black and at the exact same time, it's white. There's no way to make that true. Not by definition. You have to start altering definitions. And once you alter the definition, now you have equivocated and it's no longer the same idea or concept of truth. So anyhow, this is a biggie. By definition is a big one with people who study logic. Logical extension. This is a very powerful tool. Logical extension is similar to inference or to logical consequence of a premise. In this case, the extension of a term is the sum of all the individual things described by the term. If the conclusion of an argument is determined to be true, you can then assume anything that would naturally follow from the conclusion. You can think of this sort of like a transitive property in mathematics. Here's an example I did. I started a new business this year. My new business lifted me above the poverty level this year. Therefore, I will be in a higher tax bracket this year. Well, that's the argument. It's sound, valid, and rational. If and if I start a new business and it does make more money for me, lifts me above the poverty level, then it's actually true too. I mean, everything's perfect. Well, what can I also determine by logical extension? Well, by logical extension, I'll be paying higher taxes this year because that's part of what it means to be in a higher tax bracket. But you know what else I could conclude? Since I started a new business and lifted me above the poverty level, I'm going to need some sort of accounting going on. I'm going to have to learn how to do either my own or I'm going to have to hire an accountant by logical extension. I'm going to start having to deal with the government and government regulations and laws governing a business by logical extension, et cetera, et cetera. So if somebody says, well, I didn't say that. Look, all I said was I'm going to be in a higher tax bracket. And you start doing logical extension, you tell them, hey, folks, I'm sorry, but logical extension says these things also apply too. And a lot of folks will get themselves tripped up there. And then they start trying to play the wormy game and get out of the consequences of their own argument because they didn't think it through very well. Here's another phrase that you're going to hear me say a lot. This is another one that is important to understand. It necessarily follows. It necessarily follows, also known as logical necessity, is a logical concept that states if one thing is true, another thing must follow it, must also be true. And here's an example. If an object is dropped from a building and nothing impedes its path to the ground, there's nothing in its way, it necessarily follows that that object will fall to the ground. So if there's nothing but air between me and the ground and I drop a bowling ball, it necessarily follows that that bowling ball will fall to the ground. That's what that concept means. A fallacy. In the simplest terms, a fallacy is a mistake in the logical process by which a conclusion is drawn. It can render the conclusion of an otherwise valid argument false. At the same time, an argument may be fallacious, yet the conclusion is still true. Fallacies can be powerful tools, but they can also be tricky to apply in a proper manner or to even identify. Here's another one we went over last week: breaking an argument. Breaking an argument is a logical term that means you have shown that the conclusion of that argument does not hold up under logical scrutiny. If I can show that a deductive argument is unsound, invalid, and or irrational, I have broken that argument. Note, you may be able to break an argument by proving only one of these three things. Also, you have something called logical objection. You can break an argument by showing that the premise of the argument does not necessarily, there's that phrase, does not necessarily lead to the conclusion being presented. In other words, there's another possible conclusion that's just as sound and just as valid. That's known as an objection. So essentially, you are taking the premise of the original argument and presenting a different conclusion that is also sound, valid, or rational. This is part of what you see. I can't come up with one right off the top of my head at the moment. I'm not thinking in that direction. If somebody gives you an argument and then they say, okay, A, B, and C, therefore D. And you say, well, yeah, but A, B, and C can exist and all be true, but you can end up with F, E, G, H. All it takes is one example like that makes sense, that's sound, valid, and rational, and your objection has defeated the argument. Because what they're saying is, I've just shown you that this has to happen. It's the only way that it can be. And I show, no, here's another possibility. And it's sound, valid, and rational. Well, you've broken the argument because they've concluded something that they cannot prove. They've assumed. So we'll get to all these things as we go along. Like I said, this is just something to pop into your head and get you thinking this way before we get to the meat of today's class. And I'm chomping at the bit to get to that today because we're starting to get into my world here. Definition. This is very important. This is the bedrock of logic. A definition is a statement that gives the meaning of a word or a term. Everything in logic, it flows from the definitions. A term, that's a concept that is expressed precisely in words. Some of these terms we've been going, what does to break an argument mean? What does necessarily follows mean? Those are terms that we're defining. A statement, it's a sentence or a sentence fragment, a clause that is either true or false, also known as a proposition. A supported statement, that's a statement with a truth value that depends on the evidence or information from outside of the statement itself. And a self-supporting statement, that's a statement with a truth value that can be determined from the statement itself, such as self-report, or a statement that is true or false by logical structure, or a statement that is true or false by definition. This is something that President Clinton was playing with when he said it depends on the definition of what is. He was messing around with redefining a self-supporting statement. I know. For most of you who have never studied logic, what I'm doing right now is confusing as all. Giddy up. Nobody finds it interesting. Stick with me. We need these things in your head before we get going today. Hypothetical statement. That's a statement that's put in the form of if P, then Q. It's a what if statement. If we have this, then we have that. Independent statements. Two statements are independent if the truth value of one has no effect on the truth value of the other. That's the road to Concord at the top of this page is yellow. The chalkboard is green. And those are two independent statements. Logically equivalent statements. Two statements are logically equivalent if they imply one another. Equivalent statements have the same truth value. In other words, they start pointing to each other. Antecedents in a hypothetical statement, if P then Q, the antecedent is the statement represented by P. It's the first part of the larger, compound statement. Consequent, In a hypothetical statement, if P then Q, consequent is the statement represented by Q. So the antecedent is the proposition. The consequent is what follows it. If I drop the ball from the building, that's the antecedent, it will fall to the ground. That's the consequent. Implication. Two statements are related by implication if the truth of one requires the truth of the other. The truth of the ball falling to the ground depends on the truth of me dropping it from the building. Consistent. Statements are consistent if they can be true at the same time. Inconsistent. Statements are inconsistent if they cannot be true at the same time. Something cannot be black and white at the same time. So if I say, the ball is black, the same ball is white, those are inconsistent statements. Law of non-contradiction. A statement cannot be both true and false at the same time. This right there is one of the things that when I was in logic school got my dander up. There's a school of logic, and I'm going to bring this up on purpose because we were talking about this yesterday. There is a form of logic that argues that something can be true and false at the same time. These higher, what they call themselves, higher forms of logic. These are mental gymnastics that I do not understand how they exist in the real world because they depend on the basic principles of logic to then argue against the basic principles of logic, which, according to basic logic, is internally or self-contradicting. But they will argue that a proposition, a premise or whatever, can be true and false at the exact same time. But by definition, that's not possible. And by the law of non-contradiction, that's not possible. And yet they will then proceed to explain to you how it is possible. But this is Marx, the dialectic. Okay, this is what he's doing. He's arguing for something that cannot exist in the real world, yet he's telling you it exists. This is how Dr. Hawking, remember when he did his math, he originally at one time, he said, hey, look, the universe had a beginning. It's going to expand into nothingness. We're only doing this one time. It's not a constant expand, contract. It's been around forever. He proved that didn't happen. And his friends didn't like that because that implied a creator. So he went back and he redid his equations and he came up with a way that the universe can create itself. He used imaginary math. He used the square root of -1 and a few other things like that in his math. In other words, he created a fictitious mathematical logic to get the conclusion he wanted. The whole thing is fallacious. It's not logical. And yet there is a logic to it. Remember what I told you yesterday when we were talking about Marx? There's a logic to it. There's a thought process to it. It's just unsound, invalid, and irrational. And that's why I told you that a person can be irrational or delusional without being considered insane. You can have a thought process that'll allow you to function in the world. If you're caught up with, if you're one of these folks that, okay, sorry, Natasha, if you're a furry, you think you're an animal and you wear a costume and you run around all day thinking you're a cat, dressed as a cat, meowing and acting like a cat. Well, you're irrational, but you can still find a way to function in this world. Now, whether or not you're insane, that's going to be a different argument. You might be borderline, but not all of the people who do that are cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. A lot of them actually know what they're doing, and they can step in and out of that role. Yes, ma'am.
And why are you apologizing to me?
I thought you were a furry.
No. We've been over this a million times.
No, just 152,000. Keep counting. I'm sorry, folks. This is a running joke. When I first mentioned the furry, you didn't hear it, but Charlie over there busted a gut. All right, Natasha, off you go. Bloop. Bloop. All right. We're entertaining ourselves, folks. I'm sorry. I know you guys got the outside jokes, but one of these days, Charlie's got to find a way to do our version of the Ditto Cam. People probably pay money to watch that one. Self-contradicting. That's a statement that is false by logical structure. In other words, the way the statement is constructed proves that it's wrong. The most famous one is, there are no such thing as universal statements. That's a universal statement, dude, which means it's self-contradicting. Real disagreement. That's an actual inconsistency between two statements. They cannot both be true at the same time. Now, remember, a paradox has a resolution. A real disagreement or a contradiction, that's when it gets real. Yes, I am showing my own version of insanity. They're talking on the board about me. Contradiction. The relationship between A and O statements or E and I statements. These are shorthand, and I'm going to show you. I told you I'd show you. I'm going to bring it for you today. On the square of the opposite. Just ignore that. What it means is two statements contradict if and only if they have the opposite truth values. That if and only if. That's where we're going today. We're going to explain that stuff today. An absurdity. An absurdity is a state or condition or a conclusion of being, i.e. existence, that is extremely unreasonable or so ridiculous as to be meaningless. In other words, the dialectic says that you can be a good person and a bad person at the same time, and we have to find a way to resolve that. That's an absurdity. And that's why I was going off on that crap yesterday. Marx and Marxism and all secular humanism, every form that I've run across, is based in absurdities. And that's why they all tend to lead you to atrocity. Something that is unsound in its reasoning and not to be taken seriously. Example, the assertion that a male can be a female is an absurdity by definition. You'll also hear me say sometimes from a contradiction, all things follow. This is a logical maxim that states from the point that an absurdity is expressed as true, any and all conclusions necessarily follow it. Any and all. I can say a man can become a woman, and therefore you and I can now fly. That makes sense now. You've gone down, when you said a man can be a woman, you asserted is true. You've gone down the rabbit hole. Anything and everything can now be asserted as true, because basically what you've done is you've cut the chain that anchored us to reality. And you've gone off into Marxian world. And this is because a contradiction is, by definition, a logical absurdity. And once we are dealing with absurdities, we are in the world of rationality. Like I said, from a contradiction, all things follow. Essentially, you've gone into the world of make-believe. Now, formal logic. This is something else I want to cover before we get into the root of today's class. I promised you I would show you this. That is formal logic. I told you there's a shorthand to it. If P, then Q. P only if Q. Q if P. P is a sufficient condition of Q. P and Q can actually be standing for a sentence or a premise or a proposition. What we're doing here is we're diagramming it in a way just to look at the logic of it. We do not care what P and Q stand for at this point. But down at the bottom, you'll see a little shorthand in the bottom left. This is also formal logic. Until you learn how to understand that ain't going to make a rat's little bit of difference. You won't be able to make any. Look, Joe, for alien writing. Yeah, not so much. I actually understand this. See, here's the logical shorthand. And these are all the symbols that we use in logical shorthand. So this right here, these are being used to diagram that. So all of this is done to come to this. This is a truth table. And this is how, if you're going to study formal logic, you'll form truth tables and you'll diagram arguments, et cetera, and you'll go through it and you'll find out what the conclusions are. We're not going to study any of this here. This is not anything what we're going to be dealing with. Today, hot diggity dog, we finally get somewhere I want to play around with. Propositional logic. Now that we've weeded out the weaklings in the class and we're down to just a few people on both grounds. Now we got the serious members of the class. Now let's play. Nobody wanted to sit through the review. Shame on them. What follows is a super simplified overview of how propositional logic works. I mean, super simplified. Well, why is this important? Propositional logic is the type of logic you and I are going to use every day. Propositional logic is also known as sentential logic, sentence logic. We're going to speak in sentences, or statement logic. This is the branch of logic that studies ways of joining and or modifying entire propositions, statements, or sentences to form complicated propositions, statements, or sentences. And this is where you just hang on. We're going to put clauses or simple sentences together to make bigger ones. And then we're going to evaluate what it means. This is all about this is rhetorical language. This is the This is the rule book for how to make a rhetorical, an oral argument that will not only be persuasive, but be, if you do this right, people can't come back at you and tear it apart. It's just not going to be possible. When they try, you'll be able to deflect them. It'll be just a piece of cake, Jack. If you can understand what we're doing today and next week, you can do to the Black Knight what the White Knight does all the time, logically, argumentatively. You can just take him apart. And then your little progressive friend will be going, but I have not yet begun to fight. And you'll be like, you got no arms, no legs. You can fight all you want, but all you're using is your tongue. And keep running that thing, man. And I'll take my sword to that too. So this branch of logic, propositional logic, also studies the logical properties and relationships that are derived from these methods of combining or altering statements. So far, it may not be making a whole lot of sense to you. It will. Just stick with me. The most thoroughly researched branch of propositional logic, because there's more than one branch, it's called classical truth functional propositional logic. Lots of fancy words, not all that difficult. Truth functional just means is the statement true or false? That's it. That's all that means. So this is the study of logical operators and connectives. Those are the words that put different clauses together. And, if, but, if, also, things like this. And it's a study of these operators and connectives that are used to produce complex statements with truth values that depend entirely on the truth value or the simpler statement from which the complex statements are constructed. See, they're making complex statements here in the sentence. They're making it sound hard. This branch of propositional logic, it is assumed that a statement is either true or false and cannot be both. So what are we talking about? Hold on, we got a question on the board. The problem is, how hard do you strike with the sword of logic when they refuse that logic? Yes, I understand. I get you. Ha ha. So, premises. Today we will either have spaghetti or today we will have spaghetti or today we will have pizza. Now I want to put that together with a connector. Those are both statements, propositions. They're simple propositions. Now let's make it more complicated. Today we will have either spaghetti or pizza. It's now what I did is I took two simple statements and I put them together. Now I have a compound statement, a preposition. Now I evaluate the whole preposition. Before I could say, today we're going to have spaghetti. Well, no, we're not. We didn't have spaghetti. Today we're going to have pizza. Well, no, we didn't. Somebody ate spaghetti instead of pizza. But if I put the sentence together, today we're either going to have spaghetti or pizza. Now we're going to look at that and see what's the truth statement here. I'm going to get a little ahead of the game, and we're going to review that. But here's why this is important. You don't realize it because you don't stop to think about this, but people speak this way all the time. And what they don't realize is, if I say today we're going to have spaghetti and we don't have spaghetti, then that statement's false. If I say today we're going to have pizza and we don't have pizza, that statement's false. Okay,
got
cool.
A caller.
Oh, okay. Bring the caller in. Hello, caller. You're on the road to Concord with Joe. Hello?
Hey, Joe, there's a snake right behind you.
Oh, we got a snake caller.
Hello, snake. I shouldn't have let that one through, but
all right, off they go.
Thank you.
Anyhow,
I'll take care of that.
Yes. As I was saying, if today we're going to have spaghetti, that's false. If we don't have spaghetti, today we have pizza, that's false if we don't have pizza. Or true if we do have them. Now, when I compound them, I say today we'll either have spaghetti or pizza. Here's why it's important. We do this all the time. Is that statement true if one or the other clauses is true and the other's false? So the statement says, today we will either have spaghetti or pizza. Well, we don't have spaghetti, but that doesn't mean the whole proposition is false. What if we have pizza? Well, then we did either have spaghetti or pizza. You use these type of things all the time, and you don't even realize it. Either you're going to tax me or you're not. Did you tax me? Well, yes. Well, then the statement was true. So either the taxes that you use will cause damage here or they'll cause damage there. Say, well, no, they didn't cause damage to grandma or whatever. No, but they caused damage to the person that was paying the taxes to support grandma. Then the statement is true. The reason this is important is a lot of people who do not understand how these rules work will look at a compound statement and say, well, no, that one part's false, and they'll assume the whole statement's false. That is not the way it works. And if you understand logic and they don't, you might be telling everybody, yeah, I'm correct. He's wrong or she's wrong. But if you don't know how to explain it, your audience, your greater audience, may not understand why you are correct and they're wrong. This is teaching us how to understand why we're correct and how to make our arguments better, what we call tighter. That's what we're working on today. We're dealing with common everyday logic using sentences and how to evaluate them. That's what we're getting down to today. And I know we're using a lot of words that nobody understands and everything, but here's one for you. A proposition is a statement that can be defined as a declarative sentence. You declare a fact or a falsehood, or a part of a sentence that is capable of having a truth value, such as being true or false assigned to it. Truth values. Here's my example. My name is Joe. I have 3 miniature schnauzers. Those are both true. Everyone born on the 5th of the month is a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. That's a proposition. It has a truth value. Is it true or is it false? I don't know. I would tell you it's false, but there are one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eaters in the world. And this goes back to a TV show character, I think in the late 70s, early 80s. But yeah, see, flying purple people eaters. So if you were born on the 5th of the month, are you a flying purple people eater? Well, I was born on the 5th of a month. I am not a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. Therefore, that is a proposition, but it has a truth value of false. My name is Joe, value true. I have 3 miniature schnauzers, truth value true. Everyone born on the 5th of the month is a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. Truth value false. What's the proof? I am that objection. If you say this is true, I'll tell you I was born on the 5th of the month and I am not a one-eyed, one-horned, flying purple people eater. There's the objection I told you about earlier. Proves this false. There's your one-eyed flying. Now, things that are not propositions. Questions are not propositions. Question can't be true or false by definition. Commands are not propositions. This is because a command is not got a truth value. There's nothing about true or false in a question or a commandment. So those are not propositions. Says sometimes a proposition contains several smaller statements. Example, either I am a male or I am a female. That's actually a true statement on its own. The whole statement is true. The individual components may or may not be. This example is a compound proposition or a compound statement. It's a single proposition made up of 2 or more smaller statements. This is because the complete statement, a proposition, is true. So if it stands alone, if you put all these little small statements together into one proposition, and that one proposition can have a truth statement all on its own, that makes it a compound proposition because it has a truth value. However, since it's composed of 2 or more separate statements, both of which have their own truth value, we have to look at those as well. See, these things can be broken up and divided. This is where logic gets fun. Fun for those of us who love it, makes headaches for those who don't. In this case, what we have here is 2 separate statements. Either I am male or I am female. That's true. I'm one or the other. I am male. Yes, that one's true. I am female. No, that's false. Now, where this gets complicated and where people make these mistakes, if you got somebody who doesn't understand logic, you'll go, either I'm male or female. And they'll go, you're not a female, so that you're wrong. No, I'm not wrong. I said either or. Okay? Either one of them, if either one of those conditions is true, if A or P. Well, yeah, well, not P, so false. No. A could still be true, in which case the proposition has a truth value of true. This is what we're going to learn to study. We're going to go over the rules this week. Next week, I'm going to show you how to use them. We're going to actually construct some of these arguments, propositional arguments. So here, propositional logic or sentence logic deals with ways to combine or alter statements or propositions to form more complex statements or propositions, then evaluating the resulting truth values to draw a conclusion. One of the simplest and most common ways to combine two statements is by using the word and, thus creating a single proposition. When two statements are joined by the word and, the resulting proposition is true if and only if both of the substatements are also true. I don't know how many of you are old enough that you started studying computer basic, when it first came out with the TSR-80 or the Commodore 64 or all these computers. But you had if, then, and or statements a lot of times when you were programming that. You didn't realize you were using basic logic. You were using it in a formal sense. You were using if X, then Y. But if I put sentences in there instead, or statements, if it rains, then I get wet. That's all you're doing here. Formal logic just replaces the statements with figures, like in a math, like a X and a Y or a E and an F. That's all it does. So if you've ever worked in basic computer, programming, what was once called computer basic, you're doing this. Now, whether or not you realize it, if you know how to do HTML, you're doing a higher level formal logic. It's just got its own shorthand.
Yeah, I was going to say any programming language.
Yes,
using the same thing.
You're using logic. What propositional logic is the same exact thing using words and sentence fragments, sentences, statements, and fragments. That's what we're looking at. And I love this stuff because if you learn how to you don't need to be a master of this. Stick with me this week and next week. And if you can comprehend what I'm going to try to show you in just these 2 weeks, you're going to learn how to express yourself in ways that we call tighter. Remember, in logic, tight means harder and harder for somebody to say you're wrong, somebody to object to, or somebody to break your argument. And once you learn how to make it tighter, and a lot of times all it is adding a few words and maybe a sentence or two. Qualifiers, restricting it, tightening it down. It makes it harder for them to come after it. And it makes your understanding, your argument, the point you're trying to make, it makes it stronger. Now, you know what the beauty of all of this is? In order for you to make a tighter, stronger argument, through the process of doing that, you better understand the subject matter yourself. So teaching yourself how to make stronger, better arguments teaches you to understand whatever it is you're talking about even better than you did before. Causes you to understand the nature of it and to stop and think. Learning how to construct strong, tight, sound, valid, rational arguments will teach you how to think properly. Because what happens is you start going, okay, tomorrow it's supposed to rain. If it rains, I'll get wet. I hate being wet. Okay, what do I do with that? Tomorrow it's supposed to rain. Let's say that's true. If it rains, I'm going to get wet. Well, that assumes something, you're going to be out in the open or whatever. And then, okay, that's true. For whatever reason, you assume that's true. And I hate being wet. Let's assume that's true. Well, what can I conclude from all of this? Well, I need to do something to keep from getting wet. Oh, how do we do that? Well, I conclude either I'm not going to go through with the plans I had so that I can stay inside, or I need to bring a rain jacket, or I need to bring an umbrella. Now, notice what I just made is a compound proposition for my conclusion. Either I need to stay home, bring a rain jacket, or an umbrella.
There's one problem, though.
What's that?
In Florida, umbrellas don't work.
Yeah, that's true. Rain sideways here. But see, there's an objection, and it's actually valid in the real world here. But notice this now, my conclusion, and I could have said my conclusion is true, and then that hammer knocker on the other end of the room comes up and goes, here's an objection. That's sound, valid, and rational in the real world. And it's because when it rains here, we usually have squalls, and yeah, it rains sideways. So the umbrella won't work. But guess what? His objection doesn't hold up. This is actually, we stumbled into a good one here. So I tell you, it's supposed to rain tomorrow. If it rains, I'm going to get wet. I hate being wet. Therefore, I need to either stay home, bring an umbrella, or a raincoat. So he goes, yeah, but if it rains, the umbrella won't work. So therefore your conclusion's wrong. No, I could also stay home or bring the raincoat. See how the or gave me 3 different ways that statement could be correct. So he thinks he's objected. See, I defeated you, Joe. No, you didn't. I could still stay home or bring my raincoat, wear my raincoat. When we understand these things, we understand how to use them, we not only make tighter arguments, we better understand our own position and the subject we're arguing for and why we think that way, and we get better able to defend against them as well. When he'd offer his objection, umbrellas don't work in Florida, therefore your conclusion's wrong. So, no. Stop, 0, freeze. You missed the other 2 possibilities that make my conclusion true. I could stay home. Doesn't matter about the umbrella or the raincoat then. Or I could wear a really good raincoat, one that goes all the way to the ground, has a hoodie on it. I'll stay dry then. He didn't address those. So you've defeated his objection. And if you are in a case of rhetorical discussion, and you're going back and forth with people where you're actually trying to influence either the person you're talking to or other people, when they object and they think, oh, look, I've defeated Joe, and you come back and you say, no, your objection doesn't hold because of X, Y, Z. Well, not only have you defeated their objection and forced them to rethink their position, anybody listening now is going to be like, oh, wait a minute, that guy didn't know what he was talking about. Joe's doing okay here. You start winning your argument. It also teaches you to evaluate yourself. So you say, okay, well, I don't own an umbrella and I don't have a raincoat. And I don't want to. I can't stay home. I'm going to get wet. Well, then your conclusion doesn't work either. And you know better. So you should make a different, I'm not going to stay home. I don't own an umbrella and I don't have a raincoat. So change your conclusion. It's supposed to rain tomorrow. If it rains, I'm going to get wet. I hate being wet. Therefore, since I can't stay home, I need to go buy an umbrella or a raincoat. Then he'll say, well, umbrellas don't work in Florida. You say, well, therefore, the conclusion is I need to go buy a raincoat. Aaron Spike says poncho was my raincoat. My objection to Aaron Spike's objection is ponchos get you wet anyhow. All they do is make you wet and sweaty. In which case, Aaron Spikes goes, yeah, he's right. Or cold wet. It just depends. The poncho doesn't keep the water off you. It just gives the military something else to hand you that you have to take care of and to haul around and carry around so that when you lose it, you have to pay them for it. Yes. Or you just embrace the suck. Yeah, I know. I get it. Just get wet. I understand. All right. So I got another example of this one I put up here. The host of the Road to Concord is named Joe, and I am the host of the Road to Concord. Therefore, I am named Joe. Well, how do I know this? In this case, our example is a logically valid argument. This is because the propositions are both, it's the overall proposition, the compound proposition is true. And it's true because it's an and statement. So both parts of it, there's 2. The host of the Road to Concord is named Joe. That's a statement. The next statement is I am the host of the Road to Concord. Okay, put them together with and, made a compound statement. So because it's and, both have to be true in order for the whole compound statement to be true. Well, I am the host of the Road to Concord, and the host of the Road to Concord is named Joe. My name is Joe. Therefore, I am named Joe. Perfect. If one of those 2 if the host of the Road to Concord was named Charlie, and I am the host of the Road to Concord, but my name is Joe, we'd have had a mess on our hands. Understanding this, a lot of times, just all you got to do is know what the rules are.
Yeah, that would have been a real mess.
Aaron Spike says, you are correct. Never could stay dry in a poncho. See? I knew about that poncho. That's why I didn't bring that thing up. So the study of these logical connectors, such as and or, and the rules that determine the resulting truth values, is a large part of propositional logic. This study of logical connectors and their effect on the truth value of propositions is at the heart of determining the validity of an argument. It is how we determine whether or not 2 or more propositions are consistent with each other, whether they are contingent or whether or not they are contradictory. And we'll get back to those in a little bit. Now, I'm going to go ahead and we're going to have just a little discussion, see if I can bring you into a tight, neat little ball. I'm sensing that I could be wrong. I don't know if you're following me today. I know a lot of people, it just makes their eyes glaze over. Let me see if I can bring this back to the kitchen table for a little bit. Then we'll go into the break. And when we come back, we'll finish today. You have to understand the language of what you're dealing with. Logic has its own language. If we were talking about football, first downs and passes and laterals and, stances and things like this, you got to know the language. If we're, like I told you last week, if we're dealing with cross stitch, what's a cross stitch? What's a running stitch? What's a parallel stitch? All these things. If I want to talk about, needlepoint rather, was what that would all be. A cross stitch, a loop stitch, all these things. If you're doing needlepoint, then you have to know the language. If we're cooking, I have to know what I mean to leaven it or to braise it or, to whip it, stir it. Those are all different things. So we got to know the language. All we're trying to do is understand the language that goes to logic. Once you understand the language, we can start talking and discussing the concepts. Okay, because concepts you use the language to discuss the concepts. Concepts of thought or an idea. Language is the tools that we use to discuss that thought or idea. Why is this important? Everything you do, if you're trying to persuade somebody, you're making an argument. If you're trying to get them to see it your way, if you're trying to explain to them why something does or doesn't work, or why they have a misunderstanding, why their opinion is wrong, why they have a misunderstanding of a fact. History is one of those things where people like to say perception's reality. History is true from your position, but different from his. That's one case where, yeah, you might win me over with that saying. Because what we mean by the truth of history there is not capital T truth, not a value statement of whether or not it's true. There we're actually talking about an opinion. And this is one of the areas logic would help. Somebody'd say, well, truth, this is an objection, Joe. Yesterday you said that perception is reality. You said that was a self-defeating comment. So, but perception of history does determine its truth. What I would tell you is you just redefined truth. And because I understand how to use propositional logic, and because I also understand some higher levels of logic, I understand what we've done here is we've committed the fallacy of equivocation. When you understand the connectors and how the propositions and statements all go together, you start learning, and you learn the rules for them. You start learning how to examine them. And you go, okay, well, what does that really mean that, perception's reality? Well, your truth is not necessarily my truth. Okay. Something is or it isn't. That applies to all of us. That's what we call here on the show a capital T truth, and it's an objective fact. It's true for everybody, no matter what. Well, no, Joe, this guy does logic where something either is true or isn't true, or it could be true and false at the same time. You must redefine true to get to that point. You have to. And as soon as you have a new definition, you are not talking apples to apples. You're talking apples to oranges or apples to bananas. That's called equivocation. And because I've learned the rules that governing these things, I catch these mistakes when people make them when they're talking to me. And I stop them and I point them out and I said, you're confused in your thinking. Look here. Now, most times when you do that, you better be ready for them to get upset with you. Why? What did we cover yesterday? Cognitive dissonance, right? When somebody thinks they know something and you start showing them that not only do they not know it, you're telling them why they're wrong in what they think they know. The easiest thing for them to do to keep themselves comfortable is attack you. And that's what they do. It's a rare cookie who stops and goes, well, wait a minute. Okay, show me how or why I'm wrong. And then they listen to you. That's the person you're looking for. But if you find that person and you don't know how to explain it, now you're in trouble because you're going to make it worse. You're going to make that person convinced that they were right. You said they were wrong, but you didn't know how to explain it. No, they must be right. You're the one who's wrong, because if you were correct, you'd be able to explain it. What we're learning here is how to explain these things when you encounter this. Makes you very powerful. And I don't mean as in Thanos snap the finger powerful. Makes you very convincing. Makes you solid on the ground that you're standing on. That's what's important here. Because we're dealing with arguments. An argument is basically, in the case that we're talking about, in this situation, rhetorical argument. How do I convince somebody to look at something a different way? How do I convince them to move off of their opinion? Say, hey, look, man, your opinion doesn't work. Socialism, we should all be running around taking care of each other equally, from everybody according to their needs, from their abilities according to their needs. So because that person there, Bill Gates can make $1 bazillion, he should be working to keep 516 million people out of poverty. Well, that's called slavery. Well, no, it isn't. He should just want to do this. See, now what you're doing is you're rearranging definitions and moral statements and all of this stuff. And if you don't know how to logically address these issues, the only thing you're left with, well, I don't believe that, or I don't feel that. Well, guess what? An opinion does not necessarily have a value statement, a truth value, rather. Notice how I said necessarily. So I can give you an opinion statement that doesn't have a truth value. Let me show you. Schnauzers are the best type of dog. Best breed of dog, Schnauzers, miniature Schnauzers. Is that true or false? It doesn't have a truth value. It could be anything. If you do not have an ability to reason using logic, if you don't have some understanding of the rules, some understanding, you don't need a mastery, but if you don't have some, then you're never going to be, you're stuck. If I run into somebody who says communism will work, well, no, it won't. Okay, tell me why. Well, it just won't. That's my opinion. That's how I feel about it. You're stuck. You feel that it won't work. He feels that it will. There's no truth value in either one of those statements. They're just opinions with no truth values. Now he comes up and he says, communism works. And I say, no, it won't. Why? Because it goes against human nature. What do you mean by human nature? It is human nature to be concerned with self, not those outside of the self, but self. That is your primary focus. Humans are by nature selfish. Well, no, Joa, I can defeat you because here, Mother Teresa was selfless. Mother Teresa had to learn to be selfless. So your objection is defeated. So the person says, well, no, she was born that way. I'm going to say Mother Teresa was a believer in the Bible. The Bible tells her she had to learn to be selfless. She was born selfish, not selfless. She had to bend to the teachings of the Bible. Therefore, she had to learn to be selfless. Your objection has been twice defeated. Now the communist goes, And notice I didn't have to say it was my opinion. I gave him a reason. I defended it. He gave me an objection. I batted it away. Now the communist is like, oops. Say, well, if you don't take care of other people, that means you don't have empathy for them. Empathy means I feel for them. It does not mean that I have to give them whatever they want. Your objection has been batted away again, Marxist. Well, if you don't care for them, if you do have empathy, then that means you will care for them. Correct. I have empathy for them. I know they're in poverty. The best thing to do for them is not give them something free, which makes them even more dependent. The best thing for me to do for them is to teach them how to get out of the poverty on their own. That is called agape love, which means I not only have empathy for them, I have love for them, which you cannot claim, communist. Communist goes, well, I love them because I want to give them free stuff, which I go back with it. I go, well, that makes them dependent. Now, let's talk about our definition of love. Now the communist is trapped. How do I do all this? I just learned logic. Now, I happen to study it, and I learned it well enough that I can do this stuff on the fly. I have it as we breathe. To me, it's just the air I breathe. You don't have to spend that much time doing it. You just need to spend a little time with it. The more you acquire this ability to use it properly, especially propositional logic, the more you'll realize and come to find out this stuff works. And you can stump the chump real quick. All you have to do is tighten up the way you think, and you do that by learning how to think logically. And you can use logic even to think irrationally. I have an uncle, or had, he passed away a year or two ago. He was brilliant, and he worked in classified operations for the government, but he designed a computer program to play chess. And he was very proud of it. He told me it was going to beat me because I'd gotten to the point where my uncle couldn't beat me in chess. I beat him all the time, and he was he was a good chess player. I beat his computer program every time. And he tweaked it, and I kept beating it. And he finally asked me, how are you doing this? I said, you designed your program to think logically. I'm playing irrationally. The computer doesn't know what to do with me. You can use logic. There was still a logic to what I was doing, but I knew my uncle, and I was using the way he programmed his computer against him, which, by the way, is one of the things we're going to have to learn how to do with AI, or it's going to run us. We're going to come back after the break, and we're going to continue with our propositional logic, and we're going to get into these logical connectors. I'm going to give you all the groundwork, how they work, what they are, et cetera, et cetera. And then I'm going to show you how next week we're going to use them to construct real world arguments that we can actually use in the real world, and show us how to make them tighter, to the point where if you run into somebody that, if you run into your communist friend, you're going to be able to call, you're going to run that, you'll rope the dope. At that point, you got to be careful, because if you're a believer, it gets too easy to pull the wings off that fly, and you got to resist that temptation. All right, Charlie, throw him in the break, brother. we're back. I had Charlie give you all 6 minutes. Hopefully everybody got done what they needed to do. We were just having a quick discussion during the break. What I'm trying to get you at least aware of right now with logic. I'm sorry, I'm going to talk with my hands today. I'm Polish Italian, okay? What I'm trying to get you to at least be aware of. You decide whether or not you want to do anything with it in the future. But this will help a great deal. And since this is a faith-based show, we look at the world through a biblical worldview. I'm just going to use an example that came up during the break. We have folks that sometimes get sidetracked on things like, in this case, the example was the fruits of the Spirit of God, Yahweh, the Holy Spirit. And there's a running discussion that Charlie and I are aware of. And I said, okay, well, let's use logic on this. First things first, look at the person. What do we know about the fruits of the Spirit? Well, one of the things that's taught in the Bible is that the fruits of the Spirit are given for a reason. The reason is to grow the kingdom of Yahweh, kingdom of God. So that's the purpose of the fruits of the Spirit, the different gifts that God gives you for that purpose. But what's that tell us? Well, that tells us that those gifts are never going, God is never going to use them in you to do anything but grow the kingdom, advance the kingdom. So the moment a believer starts using them as a weapon against another believer or to confuse somebody who's not a believer, as soon as they use them in any way other than to grow the kingdom, now we've found the problem. We found a problem we got to look at. Because a lot of believers, well, the fruits of the Spirit told me blah, 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 or this or that or whatever else, or, if you don't have this fruit of the Spirit, then you can't be saved. That's not how the scriptures define all of this. And when you start actually applying the logic to these things, you start realizing where the problems lie. And it helps you dig down and dig down and dig down. If you want to put this in a political way, okay, fine. Joe, you're not happy with Trump. Why? Trump is not ideological. So why is that a problem, Joe? Because when an ideological problem arises, he will either make a decision that's based in his character, his personality, or he'll rely on the people around him to help him with the decision. So why is that a problem, Joe? Because if he's going to make a decision based on his character, I don't want him around. He has bad character. That's based on his life, that I know of his life. But if he's going to base the decision on the people around him, I look at the people around him. I know that they're all part of the swamp. They're all rhinos. They're going to make bad decisions. So either way we go, if Trump faces an ideological crisis, he's going to make a bad decision. Joe, you don't know that. COVID comes along. His gut instinct was correct, not to lock us down. He went with the experts around him who locked us down. He made a bad decision because COVID was an ideological crisis. No, Joe, it was a health crisis. No, it wasn't. Dig back down through the health crisis. It's a health crisis, right? It's a pandemic. First of all, look at it. Does it fit the definition of a pandemic? No. It wasn't as bad as some past pandemics we've had that did not lead to locking us down. So it did not fit the definition of a pandemic that would invoke the crisis laws that we had on the books. They used it as an excuse to invoke a law where it didn't meet the criteria. What else do I know about it? Well, it's a health pandemic, Joe. No, it's an ideological pandemic. Your solution was to take away my liberties based on crisis. The ideology of this country is you never do that. There's only one exception in the Constitution: sedition and war. Both of them are war. Are you under attack from within or without? That's the only exception in the Constitution. You cannot be attacked by a disease. You can talk in those terms, but this is why I sliced through that problem quick and easy. Because I know the way, I know the proper understanding of these rules. I know how to do truth evaluations, truth value. I know how to look at, is this true or false? Went through it, lickety split. It's also why it was pointed out, Charlie pointed out during the show, most people miss something about the way I talk. When I tell you I breathe this type of logic, this part of the logic of logic, I breathe it. It's the air I breathe. Most people miss the fact that I'm using logical connectors in almost everything I tell you. If I start a sentence with if, and then I make a statement, and you don't like the statement, the conclusion of the statement, that's wrong. I said, if Here's the condition, then the conclusion. Everybody misses the if, and they just assume I'm saying that. Well, one of the things it's done for me in my life has helped me find the guilty. If you are a retrobate, then this is the way you're going to act. And you think, well, I do act that way, but I'm not a retrobate. And you start yelling at me. Found me a retrobate. The guilty will self-identify if you structure sentences correctly. I get in trouble with this all the time. I throw these darts that are addressed to whom it may concern into the void. It's a metaphor for saying I just throw these statements out there.
So if you're a dodo cop, you will call the show and talk about a snake.
There you go. Yes. And that's true by definition, because a dodo cop is the idiot calling about the snake. So very good, very tight, very good argument there. Very good preposition, internal argument. It's sound, valid, rational, and true by definition, which means can't be broken. Because if you're not a dodo cop and you call and talk about the snake, you have just become a dodo cop. Form and function. See how this stuff works? And it might seem trivial to people, but it isn't. It can be used in every aspect of your life, even your study of your scriptures. I think I hit the mute button on time. All right. Propositional logic. We're going to get back to this now. Also studies ways that the propositions can be combined by connectors such as not. Okay, we can do and, but we can also do not. This logical connector changes an affirmative statement into a negative statement. Do not dismiss this. This is important. We use these type of logical connectors to examine a fundamental logical principle that states, if one statement is true, then its negation must be false. Conversely, if a statement is false, its negation must be true. What the heck am I talking about? If it rains tomorrow, I'm going to get wet. Okay, that's supposed to be, if it rains, I'm going to get wet. Turn around. If it rains tomorrow, I'm not going to get wet. That can be true too. That can be true. I might stay inside. So what have I done? I've told you that if it rains tomorrow, I'm going to get wet is not necessarily a true statement. What I did is I negated it. I turned it around. I flipped it around and I looked at the negation. And the negation is not necessarily true, which means the first statement is not necessarily true. So sometimes when I look at an argument and somebody makes a comment, makes a proposition or makes a statement in their argument, I don't always do this verbally, but I'll turn it around in my head and I'll negate it. And what I'm doing is I'm looking at your statement to see whether or not it's true or false. Tomorrow we're going to eat spaghetti. Tomorrow we're not going to eat spaghetti. Well, that might be true, which means tomorrow we're going to eat spaghetti is not necessarily true on itself. This is why necessary is important. It must follow. Well, I state tomorrow we're eating spaghetti. That is not necessarily true. We may not. So when I negate it, the negation's not true. Now, something is either true or false. Negate that. That's a true statement. That is a true statement. By definition, something either has to be true or false. A declarative statement, a value statement must be true or false. I flip it. And if a value statement cannot or must not be true or false. Wait a minute. By definition, a value statement has to be true or false. So the negation is false. That means the original statement is true. I now know the statement was true. The negation is a tool that helps us evaluate a statement. Yeah, Schrodinger's cat. I get it. Johnny Quest, you're trying to be too cute by half. Real quick, let me show you how logic works. Schrodinger's cat. The cat is either alive or dead all at the same time in the box. No, it is not. No, it is not. I know what Schrodinger's doing. I know what he's doing. I'm supposed to be doing, but he's wrong. He's factually wrong. How do you know? Okay. If the cat is alive or dead, depending on my perception, I take every human out of the world. I mean, there's no humans left on the world. Cat's still in the box. I say, okay, come on down here, angel. Come from heaven, outside of this material world. You come, open the box and tell me whether that cat's alive or dead. Angel opens the box and says, cat's alive. Cat was alive the whole time. It had nothing to do with whether or not I perceive it. The cat was either dead or alive in the box, no matter what. So Schrodinger is saying it's both at the same time. It's a thought process. He's using a logical tool. I understand what he's saying, but there's no truth statement in it. It's a false statement. If I look at it propositionally, I would tell him that's false. Why? Because by definition, the cat cannot be alive and dead at the exact same time. That is a contradictory statement. And it's self-contradictory. It's within itself. The cat is either alive or dead. Well, that's true. Yes. I understand that. By the proposition, the proposition says it's either alive or dead. This is where I'm going outside of propositional language. I'm going to a higher level of logic. And what I'm basically going to tell you is that you've given me a false conditional. It can't be that the cat is either alive or dead. He's only one or the other. You've structured the sentence so that it has to be true. That's a fallacy. You didn't look for the actual truth of the statement. The Schrodinger's cat in the box. It's either alive or it's dead. You don't know till you open it. He structured it intentionally to make it sound valid and rational within the statement. But he structured it in a way that does not reflect the real world. And I know what he's doing. And like I said, this is a philosophical conversation that most of y'all would get bored to tears with. You probably already are. But this is one of the things that understanding logic will help you do. You don't often get tricked by people when you understand some basic logic. I saw that, John. Now you know how to refute that. As long as you know how to properly explain it, yes, you do. Now understand also, Schrodinger's using it as a tool. He's using it as a thought tool. If he's intellectually honest, he knows that the actual value of that statement is known. You just don't know what it is until you look at it. It's like saying this. Okay, there's a car around the corner. It's blue or it's white. It doesn't matter how you know. You just know that there's a car around the corner. You can't see it. It's blue or it's white. You don't know which one it is until you go around the corner. Now, when you go around the corner, did you actually looking at the car, did you force it to be blue or white, or was it blue or white before you even showed up? Well, it was blue or white at the factory. So when it was made, it was determined, it was fixed. It's either blue or white. All I told you is there's a car around the corner and I know what it looks like. And I'm going to tell you it's either blue or white, whichever one it is, you got to go find out. So when you go to look, you find out, oh, blue car. Actually, it's a blue EV truck. It's a blue Pokemon truck, which is what Charlie's getting. So I find out, oh, look, Charlie's truck is blue. Cool. Wow. I guess I made it blue by looking at it. No. It was made blue because the factory made it that way, and the factory made it that way because that's the color Charlie ordered. So is the cat dead or alive? I don't know. You have to look in the box to find out, but looking in the box is not what determines whether the cat is dead or alive. He's using it as a thought process. In your mind, you could say, this is what's true for you is not true for me. So you can decide which way the cat is. But there is an objective reality value statement on whether or not the cat is dead or alive. And I know that we've gone down a rabbit hole with this, thanks to John. But I used it as a teaching tool. This is part of how you have to learn to look at these things. Our world is not simple. It's a simple world made complicated by humans trying to get around the truth. That's what happens. Whenever we try to get around accepting the reality of the world in which we live, we complicate things. The higher level math or the higher level logic where we're going to say something can be true and false at the same time. Well, by definition, no, it can't. So you've just complicated things a whole lot to get around something that you don't want to accept. When we complicate these things, we live in a complicated world. It can ruin and just there's no peace. You want to find things simple. You want to know what's real. What can you believe in? Logic is one of the best, most effective tools to help you reason through things so that you'll have solid ground to stand on. It's part of what we're trying to learn here today. And like I said, it's an overview. One of the things that is unique to propositional logic is that it does not examine the logical relationship between the individual parts of a statement that are smaller than the simple statement. In short, propositional logic considers individual statements as logical wholes. So yesterday, perception is reality. I have to accept that if it's propositional logic that I'm using, I have to accept it as one statement. What I did yesterday when I tore it apart was not propositional logic. I looked at the meaning of each individual word and their relations to each other within the statement. I know how to do that. I'm not teaching you how to do that right now. So let's just not worry about that. So as far as propositional logic is concerned, I have to say that perception is reality is either true or false. I can't tell you one way or the other why by looking at the interior of the statement. I have to look just at the whole. I got to swallow it whole. Like I tell people in the Bible, you got to take the Bible whole, swallow the whole thing. So either perception is reality is a true or a false statement. In this case, it can be both at the same time. See, Joe, I told you there was logic. No. Here's another one that gets complicated. But this part is propositional logic. If I tell you that perception is reality is true, what am I saying? Saying how you perceive something makes it your truth. But is that capital T truth or little t truth? Capital T truth is objective truth that exists independent of your perception. Little t truth is your truth and it is dependent upon your perception. Are those the same thing? No. So if I tell you perception is reality, let me change the sentence and see how this works. Perception is little t truth. Yeah, that's true. How I look at something is my little t truth. Perception is capital T truth. No, that's false. How I perceive it has got nothing to do with the reality of the actual objective truth. So what I have here is a sentence that can be true or false at the same time. And when people come along and say, no, it is true and false at the same time, they commit the fallacy of equivocation. Equivocation is when you use the same word to discuss two different things. In this case, truth or reality. Is it little r reality, your reality, or capital R, objective reality? Same thing. Because I know the rules of logic, I'm able to get through that without a problem. It doesn't upset my world. And I can explain it to others. So when they use these cute little sayings thinking they've said something big, I go, all you've done is show me you don't understand the issue. Now it's up to me to decide whether or not I want to try and help you with that. Some people don't want the help. Others will receive it. I've noticed today is one of these days where very few people want the help. You are the ones I really want to teach. You're the audience member, the class members that are not wasting my time on this type of day. This is a class that's not easy to teach because I'm not going through it step by step trying to teach this to you. I'm trying to explain it in a tabletop manner that you can access, start to kind of digest and understand a little bit and decide whether or not you want to go further. Because this isn't for everybody. And I've got that. I understand that. This is not an easy thing to teach right now. Trust me, because I want to dive into this as though I'm teaching an actual logic student who paid to be in this class. Oh man, do I geek out on this stuff. So this is hard for me. I'm riding the brakes. It's not easy.
I'm going to make it even harder for you.
Okay.
So, because I'm just thinking about this and I have an example in my own life, but someone that, believes their own truth, not necessarily capital T.
Okay, so they believe little t.
You would call them irrational, I would expect, because
yes,
especially
if their little t truth,
their little t truth does not agree with capital T.
Yes,
truth.
that is actually the definition of irrational.
Right.
Delusional. It's delusional.
So,
and delusion is irrationality. So yes.
So how do you reach someone like that? Because they're not thinking rationally nor logically. So how do you change, I guess, their perception of reality from their little t truth to capital T truth?
Oh, folks, I've got an answer for this, and Charlie's going to understand it. I don't know how many of you out there will. You cannot understand capital T truth unless you are born from above.
Okay. That answers that.
Not my opinion. The lawmaker's statement of fact.
So there's only so much we can do as individuals. The rest is left to
The person you're trying to help and that higher power. You and I would call it the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. Now, Joe, did you just say if I don't want anything to do with logic that I don't have? No, I did not say that, did I? But I did say that when capital T truth is presented to you, you will not and cannot understand it unless you're answering the call of the Spirit. And that's true. Because all you're answering is the call to self. All you will see is little t truth.
Yeah.
So did I help you with that answer?
Yeah.
Might not be the answer you
Well,
wanted.
Well, I mean, it fits. I mean, it's not necessarily fun because, you know,
Objective reality isn't.
it's difficult to try to deal with people that are set in this fantasy existence, I guess is what I would call it.
And I have been dealing with progressives now for 30 something years. Trust me, I know what you're saying. You can't. Both Thomas Jefferson and Thomas Paine said it is as useless to try to reason with those who have renounced reason as it is to give medicine to the dead. Well, if you have renounced reason, you've renounced capital T truth. If you have renounced capital T truth, who have you rejected? Not what, who. I am the way, the truth, and the life.
Yes. Okay.
You're welcome, sir. Yeah. Not what most people want to, but hey, logic will get you through it really quick, folks. Logic's a tool. The tool only works as well as you know how to use it. Wisdom tells you how to use that tool. So another way to think of this is that a simple statement can be thought of as a complete unit that has a single truth value, meaning it is a complete thought that is either true or false as a whole. The Bible is either true or false. Joe is thousands of words. Yes, it's either true or false. Must be taken as a whole. So that's how all of that good stuff works in this world. Keep going. We have more for you today. As an example, George W. Bush is a president of the United States. Is a president of the United States. George W. Whoops, got a comment on the board. It says Jason, supporter, says, I got it, but it isn't objective still. But isn't objective still objective, whether from above or not? Okay. In other words, is objective reality still reality, whether it comes from above or not? Not according to the Bible. All capital T truth, according to the Bible, comes from above. We're going to get back to our example. This is a real world thing that I can discuss, so we will always stop for those teaching moments. Sorry, Jimmy. Don't mean to do this, but got to go there. Ayn Rand. She understands logic. She understands how to use it fairly well. She understands how to apply it to her purposes. She screws up when she starts applying it to things that are beyond her ability to see. She says that the basis for all morality is self-love, and self-interest. No. That works in the secular world that denies the existence of a God and a creator, but then that's not morality by definition. You know, when you go and you look at your definitions of morality, it just means they'll tell you what's ethical, what's right and wrong according to the law. Yes, exactly. The law. And Ayn Rand would say, natural law. Exactly, Ayn. Morality is defined by what? Natural law. And she'd go, right, self-interest. I'd say, wrong. You do not set the law, Ayn Rand. You did not create natural law. So you do not get to define morality in terms of what you want or need or think. You have to define morality in terms of the lawgiver's laws. Who is the lawgiver of natural law? Oopsie. She did not recognize herself. So although she understood how to use logic, and very well, she missed the foundation of that logic and the resulting morality because she looked only at herself. She thought she was a god. And in the process, she redefined morality. She redefined the definition of morality. The moment she did that, she commits the fallacy of equivocation. And I would have had no problem telling that to her face. And since she's intellectually honest, and I know she was, she would realize the trap she was in. And the minute that I did that, she would start arguing over the definition of morality because that's the only way she can salvage herself. The problem with that is I'd keep telling her it's a law. Yes, exactly. Law has to have a lawgiver by definition. If there's a lawgiver, you found God. Then I just ask her, Ms. Rand, did you make the laws of this universe? No. Checkmate. So capital T truth must come from above. Not only according to the Bible, but by definition, as we describe objective reality and objective truth and morality and these things like that. And the only way to get around it is to redefine those words and terms. And the minute you redefine them, you're into the land of equivocation, which is fallacious, which means that your conclusions are unsound and often irrational. So back to the example we were trying to use. George W. Bush is a president of the United States. George W. Bush is a son of a president of the United States. Therefore, there is someone who is both a president of the United States and a son of a president of the United States. This is really cool. This is where you got to pay attention to the words. In order to understand that this is a valid argument, it's sound, valid, and rational. You have to recognize that George W. Bush is the same person in both of the two prepositions. In other words, he's the subject of the first two. In this case, they are the subject in both propositions. However, propositional logic does not examine the relationship between the two subjects. In other words, in propositional logic, I don't want to look to see if George W. Bush in the first proposition is the same in the second. All I want to do is look at the truth of the different ones. So, in other words, what I'm trying to say here is I could take George W. Bush is a president of the United States and I could replace that with P. And I could say George W. Bush is a son of the president of the United States. I could replace that with Q. And then I could say if P is true and Q is true, then someone who is both P and Q in the United States, I could replace this with value settings, with variables. That's all propositional logic is doing. It's trying to simplify things that are otherwise more complicated. So propositional logic is the primary study of logical operators. That's what we're really looking at. And we told you we'd come back to this. This is where we really, really wanted to go. This is where I wanted to get us today. And next week, we're going to look and see how these work. Here is the diamond in today's class. A logical operator is any word or phrase used to either modify a statement, make a different statement, or join multiple statements together to form a more complex statement. In English, words such as and, or, not, if, then, because, and necessarily are all considered to be logical operators. Conjunctions of a sort, if you want, but we don't mean necessarily conjunctions. In this case, logical operators have a little bit more than just a conjunction. A logical operator is said to be a truth functional. It's truth functional if the truth values or the truth or falsity, etc., of the statement it is used to construct always depend entirely on the truth or falsity of the statements from which they are constructed. In other words, it all has to be internal to the statement. when we were looking at this right here, it says, therefore, there is someone who is both a president of the United States and a son of the president of the United States. Whether or not that sentence is true depends in operational logic, depends entirely on that sentence and nothing else. Is there a single human being who was both a president of the United States and the son of a president of the United States? Yes, George W. Bush. Guess what else? It could also be John Quincy Adams. See, I can find more than one example in the real world that makes this a true statement. So that means it's internally supported. It's whether or not it's true or false depends entirely on the statement itself. So that's where we're going at with logical operators. I know this is all technical gobbledygook to most people. I got that. Just next week is when I may really bring this into focus, but just bear with me because this is important. Some of you out there might be wanting to track this. English words and or not, they're at least arguably truth functional. In other words, when I put them in between two or more sentences, it's going to create a bigger compound proposition that will be true or false. That's because the compound statement joined together where the word and is true if both statements so joined are true, and it's false if either of them are false. So if I tell you this and that, A and B, in order for the compound statement A and B to be true, the smaller statements A and B have to be true. We've already covered this a little bit today. But if I said A or B, the compound statement is true if either A or B is true. This is what the logical operators are about. This is what Charlie noticed with me. A lot of times I will tell you if. And what I'm trying to explain to you is if this condition exists, then this is the conclusion. Sometimes you will hear me say this or that. I understand how I'm speaking to you. Like I've said, it's become so much a part of my character. It's the air I breathe. I don't even realize it anymore. I do this out of habit. It's also why a lot of times people think I'm a know-it-all. Well, you think you know everything. No, I just know what I know and why I know it. There's a lot of things I don't know. The things I do tell you I know why I know them. You will also hear me tell you, in my opinion. I'm telling you right up straightforward that this is not a truth value statement. I'm giving you my opinion, not a truth value statement. When you learn to talk and speak that way, people are going to call you a know-it-all, but you're also going to start realizing that those folks who care about capital T truth are going to gravitate you a lot more than they already do. They'll recognize wisdom in you. The wisdom comes as you learn this. You learn logic. You're also learning capital T truth. Now, whether or not you accept its source, that's a theological issue. You know, we just talked about Ayn Rand. But whether you can still learn to use it and not accept its source. But then what you're doing is you're using logic to your own purposes, not the purpose it was meant for. So that all gets into whether or not you're God. So a compound statement joined together with the word or, that's true if at least one of the statements is true, and false if both of the joined statements are false. These are the different types of logical operators, and we're going to look at them closely next week. But now, just a little overview. Not all logical operators are truth functional. They're not all, they don't all have to have a truth value associated. Here's an example. The word necessarily. Whether a statement formed using this logical operator is true or false does not depend entirely on the truth or falsity of the statement to which the operator is applied. Here's a couple examples I grabbed from the online Encyclopedia of Logic. 2 + 2 = 4. Well, that's true, right? Yes. Okay. Someone is reading an article in a philosophy encyclopedia. We don't know whether or not that's true, but let's just assume it is. Okay. Let's say they're both true. Now, in the next two examples, they've been modified with necessary. Let's read them again. Necessarily, 2 + 2 = 4. That's true. Okay, because it is necessary by definition that 2 + 2 = 4. 4 must always come from that. Well, the next statement, necessarily, someone is reading an article in the philosophy encyclopedia. Well, it is not necessary that somewhere in the world at this moment somebody's reading an article in a philosophy encyclopedia. They may not be. So that's a false statement, because necessarily says has to be. Not necessarily. It doesn't have to be. So that's a false statement. So in this case, the first statement is true, but the second example is false. That's how we know that not all logical operators have a truth value. Necessarily is one of these ones that doesn't have to have a truth value. This is important because of the way we use these operators. I don't know how long you've been watching me or how long you've been listening to me. But if you've been with me any length of time, Charlie, chime in if this rings any bells. It's up to you. You've heard me say necessarily several times here and there over the years. I'll say that's not necessarily, or I'll say it is necessary that. Whenever I'm going to drive into that language, I forget that most of the people listening to me don't understand what that word means. Because sometimes I'll even say logical necessity. When I'm doing that, I make the mistake of assuming everybody else I'm talking to understands what I'm saying. That's my mistake. It's a boo-boo. I shouldn't be doing that. Because if you don't understand the language I'm using, I'm not communicating effectively. And that's on me, not you. So I screw up. I don't mean to screw up, but I do screw up. When you hear me telling you necessarily, I'm trying to make a point. I'm trying to stress something very hard for you. I'm trying to tell you that it has to be, or it doesn't necessarily have to be. And this is by logical rule. And I got to try and remember that in the future. But if you ever hear somebody who seems to understand logic start using the word necessarily, pay attention. They're trying to tell you that you're making a conclusion you shouldn't necessarily make, or you're ignoring one that you have to make and you don't have a choice in the matter. Necessity is one of the things that I've tried to explain to my audience over the years. As I've worked out my worldview of how things work in this world and how I understand them and how I want to work accordingly, a lot of the things I encounter in the world are already decided for me. Why? Because I worked out my worldview, and when I encountered them, the conclusion was necessary from the worldview I'd already worked out. You're too inductive. Yeah. I tend to be more deductive than inductive. All right.
Yeah, but that's the thing, is a lot of people miss that kind of stuff, and I think that's why you've had some people that, you know, had issues with the way you presented some stuff in different shows, because they didn't understand how precise your arguments were.
Or my language.
And because of your language, they didn't understand the language you were using, and that's where you get some misunderstanding.
I've told my audience this for a long time, for as long as I've been on radio or on this show. I use language like a scalpel. I do. And if you've listened to me for any length of time, you'll notice that. But you'll also notice when I really want to get your attention, I will be very careful with the language I'm using. And if you notice that I am taking great pains and care to word something very tightly, very specifically, very focused, what I'm doing is it mentally creating an argument that is sound, valid, rational, and bulletproof. And I'm stating it to you so that I cannot be misunderstood by an intellectually honest person who is rational. Now, I cannot assume that I'll ever be understood by somebody who's not intellectually honest and rational. So there's no sense in even talking to that person or stipulating that's who I'm addressing. That person could hear me say the cow jumped over the moon and they'd come away with, Joe said the starfish grabbed Charlie by the nose. No, dude, I said the cow jumped over the moon. See, Joe just said starfish grabbed Charlie by the nose again. That's what I mean by it. There's nothing you can do with those people. They hear what they want to hear. When you see me get very specific with my language, I am trying to be as honest with my audience or the person who's listening to me as I can possibly be. And I'm trying hard to make sure there is no room to misunderstand me. And I'm trying to state my position in a way that you are not going to be able to take apart logically. So that's what's going on there. And I do it a lot more than people realize. And because we're not taught logic anywhere in our high school, grade school, public education doesn't teach it. You can go get a liberal education at a university and never take a logic course. So most people don't even realize what I'm doing. But now if you're a philosophy student, the minute my language changes and starts getting tightened, I have your undivided attention because you realize, this guy's pointing that daggum dart right between my eyeballs. Pay attention. I might be the target. And it'll work with somebody like that. Somebody who's been trained to use logic will get it. Now, real quick, truth functional propositional logic is a branch of propositional logic. Now, since we're dealing with logic, look at that. It says a branch. If I'm just talking, I could say one branch of, but a logical connector. It's telling you I'm dealing with a specific part of propositional logic. A branch suggests there's more than one, and there is. Propositional logic focuses on the study of truth functional operators. Classical or bivalent, that's the technical word. Classical truth functioning proposition logic is the branch of propositional logic that assumes a statement, whether it's simple or complex, can only have one of two possible truth values. It's either true or false. That's why we're going to deal with this mostly. I don't like the other branches. Additionally, it assumes that every statement must be either true or false, but never both. Classical truth functioning propositional logic is the most widely studied branch of propositional logic, and this is why we will focus on primarily on this area. Propositional logic is just another way of saying ordinary language logic. However, there are other branches of this, and this study, such as it uses things, logical operators such as necessarily. They're not necessarily a truth functional. And there's a non-classical propositional logic that is considers possibilities where either a proposition may have a truth value other than true or false. Now, remember what the definition of proposition was. In this logic, proposition is defined as a statement that is either true or false. So what they're telling you is they're dealing with a type of logic that has redefined proposition, which means it's no longer a proposition. Or it'll consider where a proposition may have an indeterminate truth value or lack of a truth value altogether. Again, it's not a proposition. Or sometimes where a proposition may be both true and false at the same time. Again, not only is it not a proposition, now it's not propositional logic. So when they say there is non-classical propositional logic that considers these things, they had to put non-classical in front of it for a reason. So to tell you that you're not actually talking about propositional logic, you're talking about something entirely different. I don't like that stuff. I'm aware of it. I know of it. I hate it. I've always hated it because it's make-believe logic. And the make-believe logic still depends on basic logic. So if you are depending on basic logic to twist logic into something that's make-believe, it's internally contradicting. And when I was in philosophy school, my professors tried hard to get me to, they swore up and down they were right and I was wrong and I just didn't understand. And I told them, no, I understand very well. You're trying to use logic and wave your hands and do all these machinations to get me to believe in absurdity. Because like I said, one of the things that the square root of -1, by definition, that doesn't work. By definition, something cannot be true and false at the same time. But then they'll tell me, well, it is in this logic. Well, then that's not logic. By definition, you've created something else. So next week, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to construct arguments and how to take a few apart too. And I'm going to use what we've just gone over today, and I'm going to show you how to apply it in the real world. Next week is where you guys are going to get today, the logical connectors, that's the gold today. That's the gem. The if, then, if and only if, or if and not, if this but not that, if but statements. All these things are beautiful. Once you understand them and how they work and how to use them and how to recognize them in the things other people are saying. Oh my gosh. This is why I tell you I can take that little dagger and just boop, 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 slice things apart real quick. Because what I'm doing is I'm looking at the logical connectors they're using, and I'm dissecting their segments, tearing them apart, showing, no, this is not true. You said it was, it isn't. This is why it's not. You said this and this both have to be true for your conclusion here to be correct. Well, this one isn't true, so your conclusion can't. You're just taking it all apart, man. And when we get into the logic world, this is what we're going to do Thursday. We're going to take the wings off the lack off fly again. Oh boy. And I will not be able to contain my glee. I love doing this to people who think that they've got, lack off is like, I've got the logic, and Joe, you just don't understand it. Oh, yes, I do. Let me show you. You're the one who has gotten too smart by half because you're not grounded in what you think. And let me show you how. Just the rules of basic logic. And this is the part that when I was on the radio and we're doing, political muckraking and story, this is the part my audience usually loves. You mean like Obama said this, this, and this, and Joe come along and they're like, just pieces, shreds on the floor. Y'all love that. You don't like it when I do it to you. I don't like it when I do it to the man in my mirror, but I do. So we all should. Notice how I just changed that. If I'd have continued the sentence with we all have to, it would have been false. Caught myself. We all should have some operative knowledge of language. I mean, basic logic. We all should. That should be a class in high school. Every one of us. Basic logic should be a class in high school. Especially when we get to fallacies. Oh my gosh, are those going to be fun? Because they throw those at you in advertising, in the news media, in editorial. They throw those things at you all the time. Yes, Boolean logic. I know. Different types of logic. But we just need to be aware of them. Before we go today, there was a few things asked yesterday we're going to cover real fast on the wrap up. Tomorrow, Worship Wednesday, we're going to continue with our slide on a different way to look at prophecy. That has apparently been a very fruitful and productive study. We're going to continue it. We're going to be at that for weeks. That's something I'm having fun with. Thursday, we're going to continue with George Lakoff's Little Blue Book. That's the title, Little Blue Book. And we're going to keep taking old Georgie apart because I'm loving that. But in the process, I am showing you what they think with their own words. I've told you before, if you know where to look, they'll tell you what they think. Well, this time, since I have the tools available to me now that we can actually go through their words, we're doing that. And we're making mashed potatoes out of it in the process. Friday, next chapter in the American Covenant, our book study. So we'll get to all of that. I'm enjoying all of this. It should all start wrapping up. All our summer studies should start wrapping up right about the end of July, first part of August. We'll be back into a normal cycle by the end of August. I was asked to start putting the logo or looking to putting the logo on, shirts and et cetera, et cetera. I'll get into that. I'll look. It'll have to be one of these ones where they print when you order it. I don't know how expensive they'll be, but we'll look into it because I'll probably try to afford a couple myself. I was also asked what this thing is behind me. This was given to me by my middle son, Kyle. Apparently, they make all these little toys or whatever, little figurine things. Try to get it where you can see it without all the glare. But this is, and I don't want to open it because it's a collector's item, but it's just a little figurine thingy of George Washington crossing the Delaware. There you go. That's what it looks like right there inside. And I don't know what these things are called. Pop icons or whatever from Funko. But he gave that to me a while back before the show even started. And it makes for a cool little prop. And apparently a lot of people collect them. So I know enough about collector's items to make sure I never open the box. It's still got the seal on it. So whoever asked me about that, there you go. Folly trolley. God's guns and heel loving grandma. I was just thinking Marxists could make a program called Folly Trolley. Yes. Okay, yes.
I have to give some context to this because you haven't been following.
I haven't been following, but that's good. I like that though because it works.
But
hold on, Caitlin.
Yeah. Let's see. I'll just use her screen name, the big long screen name. That's what I'll call her. We actually know her name in the chat.
All right, go ahead.
But anyway, she was saying, that we should put these things together kind of like, Schoolhouse Rock and stuff like that. And I was explaining that we are getting ready to launch our brain train here shortly. So this is what she came up in the response to the brain train.
That'll work too. Oh, Caitlin, what did you have before I take off? You popped in there. What you got, girl?
I was just saying that the Folly Trolley would be like an excellent parody with Dr. Evil.
I was just about to go there because I was asked where I have been. Yeah, Mr. Zinker says, where has Dr. Evil been? And Joe said, Dr. Evil has been in jail. And I have. Joe has stuck me in intellectual exile, and I've been screaming in his head, but he will not let me out. He will not let me speak. Apparently, I say things that I use his mouth to say things that gets him in trouble. And well, that's what I do. I'm not Dr. Evil, But if you ever see Joe in his green shirt, you'll be seeing hi to Dr. Evil. So, yeah, Jimmy Zinker said I got to bring Dr. Evil back out. So we might actually do Folly Trolley with Dr. Evil. That'd be really cool.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
What are the ages of your kids, if you don't mind me asking? The oldest one, I think, is 35. The middle one that gave me that sucker is 28 now, which I think makes the other one 25. Yeah, I'm really bad with kids' ages, but they're older. They get up there a ways. All of them single, but gainfully employed, not on drugs, and other than that, supporting themselves. So as my oldest son told me, in the world they live in now in their generation, that puts them head and shoulders above everybody else they're hanging around with. So I'll just have to take his word for it because I don't live in that world anymore. I do bless, little blessings that you don't always pay attention to. So where else are we at? Anything you got, Charlie, before we wrap? Are we good?
I think we're good. This is good. It's helping me. And thank you for repeating a lot of this stuff because I'm starting to get it solidified in my head a little bit more.
Yeah.
But this is.
All right, Jason, I see you. I got you. Repetition, I know I need to do that. And Charlie, you need to remind me of that more often off air. Folks, I know it's going to be bragging. This is a water's wet, fire's hot statement. When I first encountered logic, I'd never had any when I didn't need repetition. I ate this stuff up. It was like the other half of my soul had been missing all my life, and somebody encountered it, and I fell right into it, became one whole. And it was later when I took the GRE, I realized that I function at a really high level in this subject. I did not know that when I was younger, but I do now. And like I said, it's just fire's hot, water's wet. I'm trying hard to teach it. This is very difficult for me. It may not seem like it, but this is a case of I'm trying to remember I'm talking to folks who may very well have never encountered any of this stuff. And I literally mean it is the air I breathe. That I don't pay any attention of it because of that. And before we go, one last thing. Caitlin was upset because she has never been in Facebook jail. Well, Caitlin, I have every one of these campaign ribbons except for the 30-day ban. I don't know how I've missed that one, but I have the 24-hour ban campaign ribbon. I have the 21-day ban campaign ribbon, the 3-day ban, and the 7-day ban. I'm still lacking a 30, so I might have to up my game. At some point or in time, I guess when you get the 30-day ban, you also get the medal. But if you're not military, none of this will make any sense to you. If you are military, you want to put all 5 across your chest and probably a whole bunch of little gold and silver stars in them as well. All right, guys. We love each and every one of y'all. Y'all take care. If you like what we're doing, please hit the thumbs up or the rumble button. Tell people you like us. Helps spread the word. If you are of a mind to do so and your wallet can actually afford it, please go to our donate buttons. You find them all over the place. I'm asking everybody who listens to this show for $5 a month, buy me a cup of coffee. Aaron Spike says he's got them all. You got the little silver stars on some of them too to tell me it's a repeat award, Aaron? But you don't have something I do. We've got the gold. We've got, the Purple Heart of YouTube. I've been wounded by YouTube and told, off you go. They don't call it a ban. They call it a strike. So no campaign stars for Aaron. So, all right, guys. We'll see you tomorrow. Y'all take care. Stay safe. Love you. Bye.